talk about what are some other solutions out there in technology that you're seeing in multifamily developments that maybe your company isn't doing, but you know is adding value for your clients?
I'm looking at the 3 cameras right here, and I'm thinking that's an ideal Wi-Fi application. You know, you need high bandwidth to be able to get the video out. It's a powered device in most cases. You know, there are some battery-powered cameras on there that have motion detectors and stuff like that. But, you know, from a safety perspective, from a, you know, just understanding the occupancy patterns of a facility, I think there's a lot of value you can get by adding cameras to a facility.
By show of hands, how many of you have cameras on your property? Yeah, I think that's a pretty ubiquitous use case.
You wouldn't use LoRaWAN for a camera.
Right. but the value that you're getting from either a security perspective, from usage perspective, is important. And then figuring out how are you getting that back to wherever you need to be able to view that video. You know, the question comes, do you have good Wi-Fi, managed Wi-Fi across your whole properties? And I think that's something that, you know, some units are really starting to make that transition, saying, yes, you know, we're going to treat this as a facility that has managed Wi-Fi, complete coverage, versus, you know, not too many years ago, and maybe with some of your properties, it's like, well, it's up to the individual resident to decide what they want to do, and you know, we have a vendor that they can connect their internet to, but if they want to have Wi-Fi in their property, they're providing it themselves. And so that's, I think you're going to hear this mentioned a couple times over the next 48 hours of managed Wi-Fi, where that value comes, and being able to increase value. Probably can go on to here. Any other products, we'll skip this for a second, but any other products that we haven't talked about that you know are driving value from a technology perspective across your client base?
Quite a few. Most of them right now are focusing, due to the economy, on operational efficiencies. So we're seeing software-based implementations on things like deposit elimination, fraud detection, just anything that an owner can take advantage of to reduce the risk associated with running a community. Those are the communities that are like, or I'm sorry, those are the technologies that are like super, super front of mind for most communities right now. But I do know Sandia, she had mentioned that a big driver for her was the washers and dryers with the, was it coin?
It wasn't coin, it was moving away from the coin. It was digital transactions. So.
That's what it was, digital transactions on the property. So even though she can't be here, I think she would have been fantastic, but she had mentioned that, and she's really utilizing technologies to take things like washers and dryers and anything else that's standard to do for a resident, and she's trying to leverage technologies to make them more accessible and easier to maintain and lower the costs.
This may be incorporated into a lot of what ADT offers, but we're seeing this across multiple verticals. Indoor air quality is a huge category. We haven't specifically mentioned that one before. From my perspective, coupling that with energy, that actually is almost the silver bullet for understanding performance in a building. You know, temperature, humidity, you know, those are conditions that'll drive to mold spores and create health issues. It'll also indicate if your equipment's functioning properly. If you're using a lot of energy and you're still having humidity issues in a building, you know, you need to have that equipment service. So coupling different sources of data and being able to correlate patterns, I think that's something that you see a lot of interesting software applications emerging to do.
So I pulled out my phone because we're currently at 782 parts per million of carbon dioxide here in the room. I've got a little sensor in my bag there in the back. You know, teaching at a university, particularly over the last 3 years during COVID, you know, for my own peace of mind, I wanted to know what the airflow was like in the various classrooms we were teaching, and you know, as many of you probably are well aware of now, measuring carbon dioxide is a good proxy for saying how much are we getting fresh air into here versus having to rebreathe the air of everyone else in the room, which certainly is important. And
so
I think,
so are we good?
We're good. Yes, that is in the green. Now, if you look at it when you're on the planes, it's nowhere near as you think. The planes made a big deal of how much they filter the air, but they certainly don't get a lot of fresh oxygen in there when you're going.
The only other two technologies that I'll mention that I've seen an uptick in, number one is renewable energy, so going solar with some of the energy sources, and then number two, the big thing, and some markets seem to be dictating this now, is EV charging. So EV charging, there's a ton of, I don't know anything about EV, but there's a ton of really cool looking products out there, and it seems like they're really starting to refine that technology, make installation easier, make usage easier, and then obviously a lot of the properties are starting to have requirements like you must have X% for EV charging. Scheduling that EV charging is a whole nother nightmare that
You want to know
operators have
when they're
deal with.
using their energy.
Yeah.
That's actually a core use case for me in the market right now. Just to touch on that, there's EV chargers, level 2 chargers that are $400 before install. There's ones that are $10,000 before install. What's the difference between them? In a lot of cases, it's just data. So, I'm doing a little bit of that work right now, trying to up the ante on the lower end of that market.
Yeah.
So.
And to Marshall's point about the EV chargers, as we've been preparing for the panel discussions over the next few days, that topic has come up amongst almost every single panelist, where 6 months ago, I don't think it was ever brought up. So it definitely is one of those that feels to be on the edge. I know we have a couple vendors here showing that are doing EV chargers, and in talks with them, the few times that EV has been mentioned previously in these panels, it's always been from the perspective of we're building a new facility and we're planning to put EV in, whereas now it's immediately flipped to like, hey, there are ways to be able to retrofit to be able to provide these. So before that seemed to be fairly expensive and hard to do. I think the companies have seen that gap and have come in and found ways to be able to make it easier.
I'll add one more. I'm actually more of an indirect player in this space, but demand response program. So there's a lot of incentives in many markets to get your facilities to participate. That can be sort of a cooperative effort with the tenants in the facilities. One of my go-to-market partners focuses on the multifamily space, a company called Logical Buildings, but they use either existing thermostats that are in the building, or they help bring in new thermostats that the residents can participate. Residents get something offset on their bill by participating, and it really can drive massive value for the actual owner of the facility as well. EVs, ultimately the roadmap for that is around having grid interactivity with those chargers. So, if the utility needs to draw down a few kilowatt hours off of that during a peak demand event, they'll be able to discharge out of the vehicle back to the grid. So that grid interactivity is, really going to differentiate properties over time. Are you grid interactive or not? That'll be either big check mark for your valuation, or, you're going to have a path forward for that.
All right, now coming to this slide, I know we've kind of talked about this, and this has been a theme that's been running through the design, particularly as you're looking at being able to design in a way that you're getting the enterprise data. Is there anything else any of you want to add about design and system operation and how that can add value? Or do you feel like we've covered it? It's okay if we have.
I think there's just one thing I'd throw in there, and it really bounces off your EV charging concept and the design and system operation. There are opportunities that exist for you guys to monetize well outside of your resident base. And like we have clients right now in San Antonio, actually, that are putting in EV chargers outside of the gate. Like they've rebuilt their parking lot and moved it, where now they have these level 3 fast chargers that are public and are available in San Antonio that, through whatever apps there are. I don't have an electric car, so I don't know enough about how you can find them, but I do know there are those directories that exist and that they've gotten added to that list, and so they're monetizing.
People charge and they're paying through online.
Exactly. So I think if you're designing and you're planning and you're really thinking ahead of what you want to see happen with your community, I think you guys will start to put in an emphasis on monetizing things that aren't just the square footage in the community. I think there are a lot of opportunities to monetize. You guys can get a cut of grocery deliveries. You guys can get a cut of dog walks. You guys can get a cut of electric vehicle charging. Like, there's no limit to how many things you guys can really monetize. And I think in the future, in the sharing economy, there will be a push away from ownership and towards these sharing economy models in general. And I think that there's a huge opportunity that's being missed currently by the market, not taking advantage of those monetization streams as a holistic approach. And so I'm curious to see, more owners as they try to make little side projects like my client in San Antonio, you know what I mean? But they've found a lot of success with it, and it's been a very profitable business for them. So I'm just excited to see.
Just,
where
I think off that, sort of wove through before, but, different opportunities, some of them have nothing up front that it costs. And you can start to get a return immediately. Other things, there may be a capital expense that you have to plan for if you want to do that. And then there's other ones where, maybe as a service type of model, so it just flows into the OpEx. So getting back to that design, what business model considerations do you have? For a lot of the stuff we've talked about, what are the networking considerations that you need to deliver it? And then how easily does that play in the software layers that you already have? Because you don't want your tenants to end up with 42 apps. You also don't want to end up with 42 apps. I think everybody talks about single pane of glass. The closer you can get to that as an operator, the better.
Makes sense. So as we got one more slide on here, and then we'll turn over to any other additional Q&A from our audience. But is there any parting advice that you would give to our audience specifically about investing decisions with respect to technology?
I'd just say the market's shifted so much in the past 5 years. This didn't exist 5 years ago. Energy monitoring has been around for a long time, but what we did wasn't possible just even a couple of years ago. I think you look at any part of the market, you have that same sort of dynamic. So technology is continuing to evolve and advance. If you looked at something 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and said, there's no way I can make this fit into my business model, you should be reevaluating, just constantly, absorbing new information because the market is moving, the technology is advancing.
And vendors
Yeah.
recognize that
Vendors,
we need to provide an option of OpEx or CapEx to help ease in, whether it's new building or retrofit.
I think that interoperability piece is also becoming more prevalent. So, the walled garden concept, for a lot of things, it's, you want to be able to plug in. It's actually a feature of your product now that you work easily with this. I think even, ADT, you had RealPage on there. You had, a bunch of other companies on there that you integrate with, Yardi, all that. So, that's an attribute of a lot of these platforms, whether it's on the hardware side or on the software side, is how easily it works together with other things that you're already using.
Okay. Any other parting advice?
Yeah, I'll hit it first. One of the things to keep in mind, obviously we take a look at a lot of survey data that's out there. NMHC partners with Kingsley every 2 years, and they put a lot of good information out there. Several of the surveys take place throughout the year in the multifamily industry. And one thing that's consistent, at least the thing that I hit Control F and search for in these surveys, is the demand for smart home is going up. The expectation that residents have that smart home will be a part of their apartment living experience has gone from 30% to 50% to 60% to 80% now, where depending on which article you click on and how favorable they are to smart home technology, it's almost 4 out of 5 residents are saying, in the next apartment that I rent, I will either not rent it without smart home, or I am highly likely to rent it with smart home. So they're leaning towards the 4s and 5s on these surveys. When you implement something like this, it ends up being something that the resident uses a dozen times a day. I've gotten a doorbell notification since I've been up here. I could easily see who's at my door in San Antonio from here. Residents expect the same kind of thing, whether they're at work, whether they're at vacation, whether they're at a conference like this, knowing what's going on in their home, because that is their home, right? The apartment is where they live. It's where they experience everything. If we're working with a package delivery company, if we're working with a dog walking service, any of the things that we talked about here, you can tie that into a singular experience. And no matter how muscular the resident is, they're not going to use the gym 12 times a day. They're going to use smart home 12 times a day while they're at the gym, while they're at work. If a relative comes over early and they got stuck at the office, they can open the door for them. They can drop the temperature in there. And more importantly for you, the operators, from a vacant aspect, you can control the utilities in those units. There's a single button you can push that says lock all vacant doors at 6 p.m. All the vacant doors lock at 6 p.m. You can say turn all vacant thermostats up to 80 at 6 p.m. No matter what the painter did when he was in there or the carpet layers, they drop it down to 60 while they're working. It can automatically go back up to 80 to save money over time. You can start to see that savings real time with sub-metering. So I would say it all plays in together. The residents are asking for it. They're going to use it every single day. And then it really benefits from a vacant utility standpoint. So that's the additional considerations I'd give.
Well said. Just trying to think if there's anything I can add to it. I think there's really, you pretty much covered it all. I'd say if you guys are curious to see what those dollars and cents work out to, come have a conversation with me. I'd love to chat with you about some of the intangibles, but there's a lot to digest. So my advice always to any client on our first call is always take a step back, pump the brakes, and what you think you want, write it down, and really think about that for at least a week to 2 weeks before you move on and move forward with anything. Make sure that what you want or what you think you want is actually what you want. Because oftentimes people are learning so much in sales presentations. It's just so overwhelming that you think you want this, but then 6 sales presentations later, you're actually getting this, but you think you're buying this. So it's like you're just all over the place. And it just sets up really, I'd say, disappointment for a lot of the deployers. So I'd say if you guys just take that time, focus on what it is specifically you guys are looking for, and find a provider that's willing to ensure that that is fully feasible and not something that they've never done before. I would definitely not work with any vendor that has not at least deployed in a minimum of 5,000 to 10,000 apartments at this point. It is far been in the market long enough that there is proof of working systems. There are no more nights where I'm going to have to camp in the hallways, because in the Alliance days, I know Kristen knows exactly what I'm talking about. When we had first deployed the technology, I actually did. I stayed in the hallway with the vendor that we were working with that night, and it was rough. I mean, but we've gone through this, right? We don't have to do that anymore. So that's where, now that we are a little bit further along, finding those vendors that have that experience and are learning from that experience, I would say that is the key. That would be my advice.